In the heart of Windsor, an ancient royal symbol vanished from Camilla's possession without warning, without approval. Princess Anne had quietly retrieved Queen Elizabeth's personal cipher, an emblem of unmatched legacy, and returned it to a private royal archive. The palace didn't announce it. Camilla wasn't consulted. And the shock? Written all over her face. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What began as a routine reshuffling of palace interiors quickly turned into a thunderclap behind closed doors. For over a year, Queen Elizabeth's iconic royal cipher E2R had been positioned in a place of quiet honor within Queen Camilla's office suite, displayed subtly, yet unmistakably, as a continuation of the royal lineage. But one morning, the space it occupied stood bare. No press release, no royal communique, just whispers. Those inside the palace were caught completely off guard. Senior aides exchanged alarmed glances. Communications staff scrambled to draft statements that were never released. And Camilla, who had grown accustomed to curating her role as Elizabeth's dignified successor, was reportedly blindsided during a routine planning meeting when someone casually mentioned the cipher had been returned to archives by none other than Princess Anne. The move sent shockwaves through the hierarchy. For those who understood the gravity of such a symbolic gesture, the implications were explosive. Anne hadn't merely relocated an object, she had reclaimed a legacy. This wasn't a decorative shift. It was a silent but thunderous declaration that not all of the late Queen's legacy belonged in Camilla's shadow. And yet, Anne had made no speech. She had released no statement. She didn't need to. Those close to her claim the gesture was a personal tribute to her mother, an act of remembrance rather than rebellion. But within the walls of the monarchy, where symbolism is power and silence can be political, it didn't feel innocent. It felt defiant. Tensions flared as senior royal staff tried to manage what appeared, to the outside world, like a minor issue, but within the family, it was anything but minor. It was a quiet act of resistance. A coded message from a woman long known for her loyalty to tradition and her refusal to play palace politics. In reclaiming the cipher, Anne wasn't just protecting the past, she was drawing a line in the sand, one that Camilla now found herself on the wrong side of. But this was no impulsive act. Anne had been planning her quiet resistance for months, and the seeds of this defiance were sown long before the public ever knew. She never raised her voice. She never made a statement. But behind closed doors, Princess Anne's growing discomfort with Camilla's rise was no secret. As the monarchy reshaped itself, Anne felt something sacred slipping away, and she was ready to fight for it in silence. Though the world saw her as the dutiful, unshakable sister of the king, behind palace walls, Princess Anne was bracing against a tide she could no longer tolerate. For decades, she had stood as the living embodiment of Queen Elizabeth's legacy, disciplined, grounded, and fiercely loyal to the traditions her mother once guarded with quiet might. But now, with Camilla steadily repositioning herself as the modern matriarch of the monarchy, Anne saw something deeper unraveling. The symbols, the tone, the essence of what the crown used to mean. The quiet erosion began with seemingly harmless optics, Camilla taking center stage at royal events, rearranging ceremonial fixtures, and elevating her role far beyond what some had anticipated. Anne, ever reserved, responded not with confrontation but distance. She began skipping certain gatherings hosted by Camilla, citing prior obligations. Yet those who knew her suspected something more intentional. Her absence was not just physical, it was philosophical. The Queen's cipher, a deeply personal emblem that had been placed within Camilla's private office as a nod to continuity, became the flashpoint. Months before it vanished, Anne had quietly inquired whether it might be moved elsewhere. The request, insiders say, was dismissed without further discussion. That moment didn't just sting, it solidified something in Anne's mind. Camilla, in Anne's view, was treating the monarchy like a stage. Every gesture, every display, curated for perception rather than protection of legacy. And for someone who had lived through decades of royal storms, who had weathered scandal and sacrifice, Anne saw the shift as a betrayal, not of herself, but of her mother's memory. Camilla, on the other hand, felt the weight of Anne's silent withdrawal. Though no direct accusations were ever made, sources close to the Queen Consort say she felt constantly watched, perpetually second-guessed. To her, Anne's cool detachment was a form of disapproval that clung to every room she entered. Still, Anne never uttered a word to the press. Her restraint was louder than any speech, her loyalty to tradition more cutting than any tabloid headline. But within the palace, the temperature had shifted. The quiet war had begun, and while Anne never publicly challenged Camilla, the palace halls whispered of a brewing storm, one that would shatter royal protocol with a single action. Anne stood still that day, visibly stiff, eerily detached, watching as Camilla was crowned queen. It was a moment that defined a new royal era, but for Princess Anne, it marked the erasure of an older, deeper one. And from that day forward, something inside her shifted. For the watching public, it was a pageant of unity, one monarch ascending, the other gracefully receding into history. But for Anne, the transition was anything but graceful. Her mother's crown, once the symbol of a reign grounded in stoic tradition and quiet dignity, now rested upon a woman who had entered the royal circle under a cloud of controversy. Anne did not flinch, but her silence spoke volumes. Throughout the coronation, eagle-eyed commentators and body language analysts couldn't ignore the carefully restrained frost in her demeanor. She offered no extended glances, no approving nods, and certainly no smile when Camilla was officially declared queen. But for those familiar with the internal pulse of the royal household, it was a coded message. Behind the scenes, sources revealed that Anne had been kept out of several key ceremonial decisions, her input neither sought nor welcomed. The seating plan, the attire guidelines, even the music Camilla's camp had taken charge. And while Camilla had taken care to sprinkle her public addresses with references to the late Queen Elizabeth, insiders say Anne found them shallow, rehearsed, and politically motivated. One quote, reportedly murmured by Anne to a close aide, would later become a whisper in royal corridors. She wears the crown, not the memory. It wasn't an attack. It was a lament. A recognition that something more than a monarch had been lost. It was a sense of sacred continuity now buried beneath modern optics and public relations strategy. Camilla, for her part, maintained composure, but staff began to notice the shift. Formal interactions between the two women became shorter, colder. Conversations that once flowed with diplomatic grace now consisted of clipped acknowledgements and unspoken tensions. There was no open confrontation, but in the world of the Windsors, distance is louder than dissent. But if the coronation was the breaking point, the cipher was the retaliation, and Camilla never saw it coming. It's not just a monogram. The Queen's cipher represented an era, a woman, a worldview. And when Anne took it back, she wasn't just honoring a memory, she was sending a message that not all legacies could be rewritten. For over 70 years, the cipher E2R, Elizabeth Regina II, stood as more than just a mark of authority. It became the emblem of a reign defined by endurance, duty, and quiet strength. Embossed on state documents, embroidered onto uniforms, engraved into the walls of public buildings, this insignia became embedded into the soul of the nation. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't modern, but it meant something. And when Queen Elizabeth passed, the expectation was clear. Her cipher would remain a symbol of history, not a tool of the present. But somehow, it didn't end there. Camilla, newly crowned and still navigating a minefield of legacy, quietly installed Elizabeth's cipher in her private office, a gesture some called respectful, others called opportunistic. It adorned ceremonial spaces, appeared subtly in press materials, and was even referenced in official speeches as a tribute. Yet beneath the surface, royal watchers were already whispering, was this a heartfelt homage or a soft attempt to absorb Elizabeth's gravitas into Camilla's own image? The debate flared on social media, sparking threads and opinion pieces across the globe. Was Camilla preserving the past or trying to claim it? And then came Anne's move, quiet, swift, uncompromising. By removing the cipher and returning it to a private royal archive, Anne reframed the entire conversation. What had been treated as a ceremonial item suddenly became sacred, once more untouchable, irreplaceable, unborrowable. This wasn't just a power move. It was a declaration. Some symbols were not meant to be inherited like jewelry or titles. They belonged to the sovereign who defined them. And public opinion, previously divided, began shifting. Team Anne hashtags emerged, praising her stoic loyalty. Commentators applauded her ability to act without spectacle, to make a thunderous statement through quiet conviction. Even former palace aides weighed in, calling the retrieval long overdue and deeply appropriate. The cipher, once caught in a passive display of continuity, now stood as a reclaimed artifact of reverence. A reminder that legacy isn't something you can curate, it's something you protect. But while Anne reclaimed the past, Camilla scrambled to protect her present, and her next move would reveal just how shaken she truly was. It wasn't filmed, it wasn't scripted. But what happened behind Balmoral's doors that afternoon would ripple through the royal corridors like an earthquake. Camilla demanded answers. Anne gave none, and the icy exchange left aides in stunned silence. For weeks, tensions had simmered under the surface, but no one expected Camilla to make the first move, and certainly not in the walls of Balmoral, the late Queen's most sacred retreat. The Queen Consort arrived unannounced, stepping into a quiet drawing room where Princess Anne was reviewing correspondence. What followed was not a shouting match. There were no raised voices or slammed doors, but the stillness was almost violent in its intensity. Witnesses described a silence so thick it made the walls feel closer. Camilla, visibly controlled but brimming beneath the surface, asked the one question that had plagued her since the cipher's removal. Why? She called the act insulting, dismissive, a calculated attempt to undermine her reign. Instead, with her usual steel, she said her loyalty remained with the sovereign who defined service, not the one who inherited it. Her words were quiet, precise, and devastating. Camilla, unaccustomed to being challenged so directly and so coolly, was said to have stood frozen for several moments. Then, with a clipped thank you, she turned and exited the room. No further words, no reconciliation, just the kind of silence that rings louder than a scream. What made it worse was how quickly the story leaked. Aides loyal to neither woman scrambled to contain the narrative, but the truth had already slipped through the cracks. Anne had drawn a line. Camilla had walked straight into it, and the royal household, already battered by growing public fascination with the cipher incident, spiraled into crisis mode. Staff were issued new talking points. Scheduled appearances were quietly adjusted. Rumors flew about emergency calls with senior courtiers. But inside palace walls, no amount of spin could undo what had unfolded. For the first time since ascending as Queen Consort, Camilla had been openly, symbolically, and now privately defied. And worse, the nation wasn't turning against Anne, they were rallying behind her. But the damage had already been done, and the press, sensing blood in the water, began circling with sharpened headlines and questions the palace couldn't dodge. What began as a quiet royal conflict exploded across global headlines. Anne reclaims the Queen's legacy, read one. Camilla undone, by her own crown, screamed another. Suddenly, the monarchy's carefully guarded veil of unity was ripped wide open. What had been a private exchange inside Balmoral's walls was now a global sensation. The cipher, once an obscure emblem known mostly to historians and royal watchers, had become the center of an emotional tug-of-war that captivated the public imagination. Anne was being portrayed as the last true guardian of the late Queen's legacy, unmoving, incorruptible, and resolutely devoted to the memory of duty above display. Camilla, once cautiously embraced by the public, now found herself cast in the role of usurper. The headlines weren't just reporting, they were choosing sides. Major royal commentators began subtly, and then overtly, supporting Anne's silent protest, calling it a necessary correction in a monarchy that was losing its way. Long-forgotten editorials questioning Camilla's rapid rise were unearthed and reshared with renewed venom. social media erupted. Hashtags like Number the Real Royal and Number Anne the Defender trended for days. Camilla's popularity, so carefully cultivated over the years, took a visible hit in the polls. One survey revealed a steep dip in public approval, especially among older demographics who had once rallied behind the monarchy's attempt to modernize. Now, they were questioning whether that modernization had gone too far, too quickly, and at too great a cost to the values once embodied by Queen Elizabeth herself. In the midst of this storm, Buckingham Palace released a brief, calculated statement praising the unity of the royal household and reaffirming their shared commitment to the crown. But its vagueness only fueled speculation. No mention of the cipher, no direct support for Camilla, no clarification from Anne. Every absence became its own statement, every silence a thunderclap. Behind closed doors, aides were reportedly split, some believing the statement was too weak, others arguing anything stronger would have only deepened the divide. Pressure began to mount on King Charles. Tabloids openly questioned his leadership, with op-eds demanding he show strength before the crown fractures entirely. Public appearances by the royal family were scrutinized for the smallest sign of frost or reconciliation. Camilla's expressions were dissected, Anne's posture analyzed. Even Charles's hand gestures became fodder for analysis. And yet, through it all, the one person who had the power to extinguish the fire remained silent. But the king remained silent, torn between his wife and his sister, knowing that any move could break the family further. He had hoped for peace, for a monarchy that could survive the modern age without another fracture. But now, King Charles was forced into the very role he dreaded, referee between two women he loved, with a nation watching his every hesitation. In the quiet corners of Clarence House, the weight of silence was heavier than any crown. Charles, who had endured decades of scrutiny for the woman he chose to love, now found himself cornered by that very devotion. His bond with Anne had always been unshakable, formed in childhood, tempered by duty, and tested by time. But Camilla, the woman he had fought the world to legitimize, now stood at the center of a storm neither of them had seen coming. Behind palace walls, the tension was no longer deniable. Charles had reportedly cancelled multiple appearances, citing private matters, though insiders whispered of restless nights, extended private walks, and meetings with advisors that stretched into silence. The Cipher debacle was not merely a symbolic feud, it was a seismic crack in the royal foundation, one that Charles had to plaster over before it spread beyond repair. Aides close to the king described a man in anguish, someone torn not by politics, but by personal grief for a sister whose resolve was iron, and a wife whose public humiliation threatened to unravel years of delicate work. Anne's act, though wordless, had screamed volumes. Camilla's reaction, though behind closed doors, had ignited a firestorm. And now the monarch, meant to rise above, was drowning beneath. William, ever the strategist, had reportedly urged his father to remain neutral, to protect the institution by refusing to choose. But neutrality in a storm feels like abandonment, and Camilla, according to those closest to her, felt abandoned indeed. Her isolation became glaring, appearances were reduced, her team remained tight-lipped. Whispers grew louder that the Queen Consort was questioning her own public role moving forward. Charles, caught in the crossfire, knew the monarchy wasn't just watching, it was holding its breath. Every delay in addressing the tension, every refusal to take a public stance, only deepened the narrative that the king had lost control of his court. But what choice did he truly have? Support Anne, and risk invalidating the very woman whose acceptance had become a cornerstone of his reign. Support Camilla, and risk alienating not just his sister, but a growing public whose sympathies now leaned firmly in the other direction. And so, he did nothing. But nothing, in a kingdom built on spectacle, speaks louder than action. And just as the crown seemed ready to crack, Princess Anne made one final move this time, not just for legacy, but for the future. No interviews, no press. Just one moment, and a gesture that stunned the public. At a royal remembrance ceremony, Anne emerged wearing a brooch not seen since her mother's funeral. The cipher engraved in gold. Her message? Crystal clear. There were no headlines in advance, no official hint from the palace. But as Princess Anne stepped forward at the solemn gathering, observers knew something had changed. Pinned just above her heart was Queen Elizabeth's cipher, the unmistakable symbol of the late monarch's enduring reign. The gold shimmered, but it wasn't the metal that caught attention, it was the message beneath it. Camilla, notably absent from the ceremony citing a scheduling conflict, had no presence to counter the symbolism. And the public noticed. Whispers turned to declarations online. Anne is now the Queen in spirit. Commentators and royal watchers exploded with analysis. This was no coincidence. This was a proclamation silent, but deafening. A country still aching from the loss of its longest-serving monarch found solace in Anne's defiance wrapped in grace. Unlike political maneuvering or public statements, this was heritage armor. No outrage, no rebellion, just a daughter, honoring her mother. And the people stood with her. Support swelled almost instantly. Hashtags lit up in tribute. News programs hailed her as the keeper of the Queen's true values. A growing chorus began to question Camilla's absence, wondering aloud whether it had been voluntary or strategic. Inside the palace, the pressure became impossible to ignore. Charles, already wounded by the fracture between two women closest to him, finally addressed the nation during his speech that followed. He called for unity, respect, and acknowledgement of each royal branch's role in shaping the future. It was diplomatic, elegant, but layered with subtext. It wasn't just about Anne and Camilla. It was about lineage, legacy, and leadership. And for the first time, Charles signaled what many had already concluded. The monarchy could no longer operate in shadows and symbols without consequence. Anne had forced the issue into daylight not through confrontation, but by simply being seen, not speaking, but by showing. That brooch, that cipher, that legacy, it wasn't about nostalgia, it was about rebalancing the throne's emotional center. As floral tributes piled up at Windsor once again, some noted it felt like another funeral, not of a person, but of a power structure. Camilla's authority, once unquestioned after her crowning, now felt conditional. Anne's voice, long underestimated, now echoed through an entire kingdom. And while the family publicly began to stitch itself back together, the power balance within the monarchy had quietly and perhaps permanently shifted. In the end, it wasn't words that divided the crown, it was symbols. And while Camilla may wear the title, Princess Anne now wears the people's trust. As the monarchy faces its next chapter, one truth remains. The battle for legacy is far from over. The Queen's cipher may have been a single emblem, but its removal lit a fire beneath the foundations of the palace. What began as a quiet gesture of remembrance has now grown into a full-scale reckoning with what the monarchy stands for and who truly embodies its spirit. Anne, once viewed as a steadfast but silent figure, has emerged not only as her mother's fiercest defender, but as the living thread that connects the past to the present. Her approval ratings have surged in the weeks following her symbolic reclaiming of the cipher, with polls showing a surprising swing in public support, not just for Anne herself, but for the ideals she represents: duty over image, legacy over power, authenticity over spectacle. Meanwhile, Camilla's once confident grasp on the spotlight has noticeably loosened. She's withdrawn from several high-profile engagements, citing private obligations and strategic re-evaluations. Behind closed doors, sources suggest Camilla is working with a new team to reassess her role in a monarchy that now feels subtly realigned, and she's not the only one shifting. Prince Edward and Sophie, typically loyal to the broader royal consensus, are said to have quietly thrown their weight behind Anne's stance, reinforcing a quiet coalition of legacy keepers within the family. The narrative has changed. What once was Camilla's campaign to be embraced as queen has now collided with a deeper longing among the public for continuity, for tradition, and for emotional truth. Palace insiders hint that Anne is not done. More legacy-centered decisions are expected in the months ahead, from ceremonial overhauls to symbolic appointments that could reshape how the monarchy presents itself. And yet, for all this, the family maintains its delicate silence in public. There are no press releases, no direct confrontations, only shifting glances, scheduled absences, and carefully curated gestures that leave more questions than answers. Still, one thing is certain: the public is no longer passive. Every appearance, every speech, every brooch is now scrutinized under a new lens. The people are paying attention, not to drama, but to meaning, not to headlines, but to heritage. The monarchy may have survived abdications, divorces, and scandals, but this is different. This is a war of memory, and memory, once stirred, does not sleep. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.